A fiery meeting between Michigan State University trustees during an unusual Sunday night session. Good evening, I'm Riley Connell. Taylor is off tonight. During tonight's session that spanned more than an hour, trustees passed changes to its code of ethics, which would penalize board members for speaking out against university policy. They also voted to nearly double the salary for President Kevin Guskowitz. Trustees are recommending a $2 million annual salary for Guskowitz. That would place him among the highest paid university presidents in the country. He currently makes $1,029,000. All trustees said they support Guskowitz, but some expressed concerns about the rushed nature and the fact that trustees didn't have a plan to pay for the raise. Trustee Sandy Pierce says she hopes to pay for the nearly $1 million pay raise without using taxpayer money from the university general fund. But she told the board this decision is urgent to keep Guskowitz at MSU, with presidential searches ongoing at several major universities, including the University of Michigan. Trustee Rima Vassar says these issues should have gone through the proper approval process.
We have not seen an active offer. We have not consulted the president about whether he wants this increase, as Trustee Pierce said. We do not know with certainty where the money will come from.
I've talked to President Guskowitz. He's very, very frustrated with the behavior of some of the trustees. He's at wit's end. He is physically sick from the stuff going on outside of this university.
Trustee Pierce said President Guskowitz did not ask for any kind of raise, but board chair Brianna Scott says he has expressed frustration over recent board actions. Now, this was not the only heated debate that took place tonight. News 10's Bobby Cushing is live in the newsroom with the decision to revise the board's code of ethics policy. Bobby.
Yeah, Riley, trustees voted to change the ethics policy aimed at reducing public dissent and showing a more unified governing board. But the 5-3 vote demonstrated the division that remains among trustees. Under the new policy, trustees could face penalties if they speak out on their own accord against a measure passed by a majority of the Board of Trustees. Trustees Mike Balow, Rima Vassar, and Dennis Deno voted against the changes, saying it could infringe on their First Amendment rights and violate their oversight duties under the Michigan Constitution. Other trustees say trustees can still voice their concerns in deliberations, but the trustees' disagreements are undermining the board's responsibility to act in the best interest of the entire university.
A few members of this board have continued to act against our own governance guidance and consultation given to us by national experts, undermining the president, the administration, and decisions made by this board, attacking members of the administration, and trying to interfere in personnel matters and spreading misinformation to constituent groups outside of and within the university.
Now, Trustee Mike Balow says the new policy is aimed at preventing him from speaking out against proposals like non-disclosure agreements he was asked and declined to sign for the new Spartan Ventures, which is aimed at funding nearly $1 billion in improvements to MSU's athletic department.
So it's very disappointing to me that this abomination of a university policy is being put on the agenda on a Sunday night at 8 o'clock. This is something that is absolutely an assault on the First Amendment rights of any person who's serving in any sort of elected capacity, and an assault on the governance capability of those of us who might be in the minority at any given time.
If a trustee fails to comply with the new code, they could face censure, loss of privileges, including tickets and travel to sporting events, and loss of university-funded legal counsel. Live in the newsroom, Bobby Cushing, News 10. Riley, back to you.
All right, Bobby, thank you. Trustee Balow also asked for a legal opinion to see if the changes are in compliance with the First Amendment and the state constitution. He says that has not been provided. The board's next regularly scheduled meeting will be held on June 12th.